5 barley loaves, 2 fish, and one detail many retellings add: John never describes the boy volunteering his lunch. We are given no age, no thoughts, and no speech. Instead, John gives us a test. Philip saw an impossible budget. Andrew saw an inadequate meal. Jesus already knew what he would do, because the food was never the final point. It was a sign. And John leaves 3 clues that reveal where that sign was pointing: barley bread, an approaching Passover, and 12 baskets that should not have existed. Those clues lead backward to Elisha, Moses, and Israel's shepherds. Then they lead forward to one of Jesus' most difficult declarations: I am the bread of life. The feeding of the 5,000 is not ultimately a story about hidden potential inside a small meal. It is a revelation of identity through an impossible meal. That may explain why this is the only miracle from Jesus' public ministry narrated in all 4 canonical Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John preserve the same essential event. A great crowd follows Jesus into a remote place. Evening approaches. The people need food. The disciples recognize the problem but cannot solve it. 5 loaves and 2 fish are brought to Jesus. He takes the food, gives thanks or pronounces a blessing, and distributes it. Everyone eats. Everyone is satisfied, and when the meal is over, 12 baskets of fragments remain. The agreement is striking, but each gospel also contributes something different. Matthew emphasizes Jesus' compassion and healing. Mark says the people are like sheep without a shepherd. Luke connects the event with the apostles' mission and Jesus' teaching about the kingdom of God. John alone identifies the bread as barley. He introduces Philip and Andrew by name. He mentions the boy. He tells us Passover was near, and he reveals what Jesus knew before anyone began searching for food. Those are the pieces. We already know where the sign is pointing. Now return to the moment when the disciples could see only a crowd and an impossible bill. The scene begins near the Sea of Galilee. A large crowd has followed Jesus because they have seen the signs he performed in healing the sick. Jesus goes up a mountain and sits with his disciples. Then he looks up and sees the crowd approaching. Jesus turns to Philip. Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? Philip does not answer where. He answers how much. 200 denarii would not buy enough bread for each of them to have a little. A denarius was commonly associated with a day's wage for a laborer. Philip is imagining many months of work, converted into bread, and still failing to give the crowd more than a small portion. His calculation is not foolish. It is probably realistic. 5,000 men are counted, and Matthew adds that women and children were also present. We cannot determine the total number, but the actual crowd may have been considerably larger. Philip sees thousands of hungry people, measures the available money against the cost of feeding them, and reaches the only reasonable conclusion: it cannot be done. Then Andrew appears with something. There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. Andrew has found actual food. For a moment, his answer seems more hopeful than Philip's. Then he looks at the meal. He looks at the crowd, and he asks, what are they among so many? Philip's answer is that they do not have enough money. Andrew's answer is that they do not have enough food. Both men correctly understand their own resources. What they do not yet understand is why Jesus asked the question. John tells the reader directly, Jesus was testing Philip because he already knew what he was going to do. That creates a remarkable contrast. Philip is calculating a solution Jesus never intends to purchase. Andrew is dismissing material Jesus already intends to use. The disciples think they are being asked to become the source of the meal. Jesus is preparing to show them the difference between being the source and being invited to participate. Before that happens, however, Andrew introduces the unnamed boy. This is where familiar retellings often become more detailed than John. John does not tell us how old the boy was. The Greek term identifies him as a boy or young person, but gives no exact age. We do not know why he was there, who prepared the food, whether anyone accompanied him, or whether the 5 loaves and 2 fish were all he possessed. Most importantly, John does not narrate a dramatic scene in which the boy steps forward, gives a speech, or willingly surrenders his entire lunch. Some form of transfer clearly occurs because Jesus receives the food. The boy may indeed have given it willingly, but the text does not make his emotions or generosity the focus. That does not make the boy meaningless. It keeps us from building the meaning on information we were never given. John directs our attention elsewhere, not to the boy's imagined courage, but to the inadequacy of what Andrew found and the identity of the person who received it. Then John specifies the kind of bread, barley. That word opens the first major door into the Hebrew Scriptures. Centuries before this event, during the ministry of the prophet Elisha, a man came from Baal Shalisha carrying 20 barley loaves made from the first ripe grain. Elisha ordered that the bread be given to the people. His servant objected. "How can I set this before 100 men?" Elisha repeated the command and declared that the people would eat and some would remain. The servant distributed the bread. 100 men ate, and food was left over, just as Elisha had said. Now place the two scenes side by side. Barley loaves, an obviously inadequate supply. A servant who questions how the food could possibly be enough. A command to distribute it anyway. A crowd that eats, and food remaining after the meal. The connection does not depend on finding a secret meaning for the number 5. It is created by the entire sequence of events. Then the scale turns the connection into a claim. Elisha feeds 100 men with 20 loaves. Jesus begins with 5 loaves and feeds 5,000 men, with others possibly present. Elisha's servant doubts whether each loaf can feed 5 people. Andrew doubts whether the entire meal matters at all. In Elisha's story, some bread remains. In the Gospel, the leftovers fill 12 baskets. Jesus is not merely repeating Elisha's miracle. The much smaller supply, the vastly larger crowd, and the abundance remaining afterward all push the comparison beyond the earlier prophet. The barley points backward to Elisha. The scale points beyond him. Jesus appears as a prophet greater than Elisha, yet that is only the first layer. John has given the scene a date. The Jewish Passover festival was near. Passover recalled Israel's deliverance from slavery in Egypt. It recalled blood on the doorposts, a hurried meal, the crossing of the sea, Moses on the mountain, and a people forced to depend on God in the wilderness. Now look again at John's scene. A crowd follows a leader because of the signs they have seen. There is a sea, there is a mountain, there is a remote place. Passover is approaching. And a multitude needs bread where ordinary calculation says bread cannot be found. This is not Egypt. No Pharaoh is pursuing them. Yet John has arranged the scene so that the memory of Exodus remains close. The wilderness is where human confidence runs out. There are no markets large enough, no crops ready for harvest, and no infrastructure capable of feeding thousands at a moment's notice. That is why Philip's arithmetic matters. It confirms that this cannot be explained as good planning. Israel once faced the same basic question. Can a people live where there is no bread? In Exodus 16, the Israelites complain that Moses has brought them into the wilderness to die of hunger. God responds by promising bread from heaven. Each morning, manna appears on the ground. The people gather what they need. Those who collect much do not have too much, and those who collect little do not have too little. Their survival depends on provision they did not produce. Moses leads the people and announces what God will do. But Moses is not the source of the manna. That distinction becomes crucial after Jesus feeds the crowd. The people later speak of their ancestors eating manna and refer to Moses giving them bread from heaven. Jesus corrects them. It was not Moses who gave the bread from heaven. It was the Father. Then Jesus takes the Exodus comparison somewhere Moses never could. My Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. The crowd responds, Sir, always give us this bread. Jesus answers, I am the bread of life. That is the first great payoff. The miracle is not merely a new delivery of manna. Jesus does not present himself as another Moses announcing that bread is coming. He identifies himself with the true bread that gives life. The wilderness meal, therefore, points beyond the provision to the provider. And John reinforces the Exodus imagery immediately after the feeding. The disciples enter a boat and begin crossing the sea. Darkness falls. A strong wind begins to blow. Then they see Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water. Moses crossed the sea when God divided it. Jesus approaches across its surface. The feeding, the sea, and the bread of life discourse belong to one developing revelation. Each scene raises the same question with greater force. Who is this? Elisha can help explain the barley. Moses can help explain the wilderness and bread. But neither comparison can contain what Jesus says about himself. The barley reveals a prophetic pattern. Passover reveals an Exodus pattern. But why does Mark interrupt a food crisis to describe failed leadership? When Jesus sees the crowd, Mark says he has compassion on them because they are like sheep without a shepherd. The phrase is easy to hear as a simple description of tired or confused people. In Israel's scriptures, however, sheep without a shepherd described a much deeper crisis. When Moses knew he would not lead Israel forever, he asked God to appoint someone over the community so the Lord's people would not be like sheep without a shepherd. Later prophets used shepherd language for Israel's kings and leaders. Ezekiel 34 condemned shepherds who fed themselves while neglecting the flock. The people were scattered because there was no faithful shepherd to protect and feed them. God then promised that he would search for his sheep, rescue them, feed them, and raise up a shepherd from the line of David. Now return to the hillside. Jesus sees a leaderless multitude. He does not exploit them. He does not send them away. He teaches them. He organizes them. He has them sit down on the grass, and he feeds them. The image can even recall Psalm 23. A shepherd, green pastures, people made to lie down, and a table provided where no table should exist. The important point is not that one isolated word proves every connection. It is the way the pieces converge. The prophet greater than Elisha is also acting like the shepherd Israel was promised. And he responds to more than one kind of hunger. Mark says Jesus first teaches the people many things. Only later does the physical hunger become the immediate problem. The crowd lacks bread. It also lacks direction. Jesus feeds both needs. Even the arrangement of the people matters. In Mark, they sit in groups of hundreds and fifties. Luke mentions groups of about 50. What began as an unstructured multitude becomes an ordered community, waiting to receive what Jesus provides. Then the disciples suggest the practical solution: send them away. Let them enter the surrounding countryside and villages and buy something to eat. The proposal makes sense. The hour is late. The location is remote. The disciples possess neither the food nor the money required. Jesus refuses. You give them something to eat. The command is impossible if it means the disciples must manufacture the solution. That is precisely why it exposes them. Their resources cannot carry the responsibility Jesus has placed before them. Only after that becomes clear does Jesus receive what is available. 5 barley loaves, 2 fish. He instructs the people to sit down. He takes the bread, looks toward heaven, and gives thanks or pronounces a blessing. Then the distribution begins. The Gospels never describe the physical mechanism of multiplication. There is no flash of light. No sudden mountain of bread appears. The scene remains fixed on a repeated sequence. Jesus takes. Jesus blesses. Jesus breaks. Jesus gives. And somehow the food does not run out. The people eat, not merely the first group. Not only those nearest Jesus, not just enough people to make the event seem impressive. Everyone eats. John says they receive as much as they want. Matthew, Mark, and Luke say they all eat and are satisfied. The story began with Philip estimating that many months of wages would not give each person even a little. It ends with every person eating until no more is needed. That would already be enough to demonstrate abundance. Then Jesus gives another command: gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted. The disciples move through the groups and collect the fragments. One basket fills, then another, and another. When they finish, 12 baskets stand where 5 loaves once lay. The provision has not barely reached the final person. It has exceeded the need. This is when the crowd draws its conclusion. Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world. The Passover setting, wilderness bread, and memory of Moses have done their work. The crowd recognizes something, but recognition is not the same as understanding. John says Jesus knows they intend to come and make him king by force. He withdraws to the mountain alone. This is the reversal at the center of the story. The crowd did not miss the miracle. They missed what the miracle meant. They saw a man who could provide bread. They remembered the promised prophet. They imagined what such power could mean for their political and material future. A king who could create food in the wilderness could feed an army. He could answer economic need. He could secure loyalty without taxation or supply lines. A king who guarantees bread is a king people will follow, but Jesus refuses to become the instrument of their expectations. The following day, the crowd searches for him again. When they find him, Jesus exposes why they have come. They are looking for him not because they understood the signs, but because they ate the loaves and were filled. That sounds almost contradictory. How could people eat miraculous bread without seeing the sign? Because a sign points beyond itself. A person can stare at a sign, benefit from it, and still never look where it directs them. The crowd wants another meal. Jesus wants them to understand the first one. Do not work for food that spoils, he tells them, but for food that endures to eternal life. That does not make physical hunger irrelevant. Jesus has just fed hungry bodies rather than dismissing them. Any interpretation that ignores bodily need contradicts his compassion in the story. But physical bread cannot solve the deepest human problem. Israel ate manna, and that generation still died. The 5,000 ate until they were satisfied, but their hunger would return. Jesus claims to offer a life that neither manna nor multiplied barley can produce. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. The bread was the sign. Jesus was the answer. Then Jesus says something so difficult that listeners dispute his words. Disciples walk away, and Christians still disagree about how it should be understood. He speaks of giving his flesh for the life of the world. He speaks of eating his flesh and drinking his blood, some listeners argue. Many disciples eventually turn back and stop following him. Christians have long differed over how directly this passage refers to communion or the Eucharist. Catholic, Orthodox, and many other traditions read it sacramentally. Many Protestant interpreters emphasize receiving Jesus through faith in his sacrificial death. Other Christians understand both dimensions as closely connected. The traditions do not agree on every implication. They do, however, have to confront the same central claim. Jesus does not merely hand out the gift, he presents himself as the gift. The provider will ultimately give more than bread, he will give himself. If Jesus already knew what he would do, why command men with no money and almost no food, "You give them something to eat"? Because their inability was not the end of their role. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus gives the bread to the disciples, and the disciples give it to the crowd. John places the emphasis directly on Jesus as the distributor and source. Taken together, the accounts preserve both truths. Jesus provides. The disciples participate. They do not create the meal. They cannot finance it, discover enough food, or explain the multiplication. They never become the source of the abundance. Yet Jesus deliberately includes them in its movement toward the crowd. They organize the people, they carry the bread, they return for more. They gather the fragments. Jesus did not ask them to create what the crowd needed. He invited them to distribute what only he could provide. That distinction is essential. It protects the story from passivity. The fact that Jesus is the source does not make human participation meaningless. He chooses to involve the disciples and gives them real responsibility. It also protects the story from self-importance. The disciples can distribute the bread only because they first receive it. Their hands carry the provision, but their hands do not produce it. The miracle, therefore, follows a clear movement: human insufficiency, divine provision, human participation. The disciples' inadequacy is not hidden. It is demonstrated in public. Philip cannot fund the answer. Andrew cannot find enough material. The 12 cannot obey Jesus' command from their own resources, but inadequacy is not the end of their role. Jesus places in their hands what they could never place there themselves. This is more grounded than saying every small offering will become a spectacular earthly success. The Gospels do not promise that every investment will multiply, every project will grow, or every sincere act will produce visible results on the scale of this miracle. The power is not a property of smallness. The lesson is not that a limited resource contains unlimited potential if we believe strongly enough. The lesson is that human limitation does not limit Jesus, and that he can include limited people in work whose source remains beyond them. That brings us back to the numbers. 5 loaves, 2 fish, 12 baskets. Do they form a secret code? Christians have offered many symbolic interpretations over the centuries. Some are ancient, thoughtful, and rooted in the conviction that Scripture forms one unified story. Augustine and other early interpreters sometimes connected the 5 loaves with the 5 books of Moses. In that reading, Jesus opens and distributes the nourishment contained in the law. The 2 fish received several interpretations. Some writers connected them with the royal and priestly offices fulfilled in Christ. Others linked them with the Psalms and the prophets, or with different divisions of Israel's scriptures. These readings belong to Christian interpretive history and can illuminate how earlier believers connected the miracle with the rest of the Bible. But they are not all saying the same thing. That variety matters. John never explains that 5 equals the books of Moses, or that the 2 fish represent one particular pair of biblical offices. The Gospel provides no fixed decoding chart. Those symbolic readings should therefore be treated as theological interpretations, not as definitions explicitly supplied by the author. The barley-Elisha connection has stronger textual support because it depends on a complete shared pattern: barley loaves, an inadequate amount, an objection from a servant, a command to distribute, people eating and food remaining. The Exodus connection is stronger because John explicitly mentions Passover and then develops a direct conversation about Moses, manna, and bread from heaven. The 12 baskets also have a stronger narrative foundation, although the Gospel does not formally decode them. There are 12 disciples. Israel had 12 tribes. Jesus is gathering and feeding a people described as sheep needing a shepherd. When the meal ends, the 12 stand holding 12 baskets of what they knew they could never have produced. The image naturally suggests provision sufficient for Israel and abundance entrusted to the 12. Yet it remains an illusion rather than a mathematical formula. Later, after another miraculous feeding, Jesus specifically asks the disciples to remember how many baskets remained after each event. The numbers matter, but numbers matter because they belong to a narrative, not because every number permits unlimited speculation. The hidden meaning emerges most reliably when the entire scene remains intact. The barley recalls Elisha. The scale reveals someone greater than Elisha. Passover, the mountain, the wilderness, the bread, and the sea recall Moses. Jesus then claims an identity greater than Moses. The leaderless crowd evokes Israel's failed shepherds. Jesus teaches, organizes, and feeds them like the shepherd God promised. The 12 disciples receive what Jesus provides and carry it to the people. The 12 baskets reveal that his provision is not exhausted by the need. Then the crowd tries to make him the king they want, and Jesus refuses. They saw the bread, they felt the satisfaction, they counted the fragments, and still, they stopped at the gift. At the beginning, Andrew looks at 5 loaves and 2 fish and asks the obvious question, what are they among so many? By the end, that is no longer the decisive question. The significance of the meal was never hidden inside its size. The loaves were not powerful because they were small. The fish did not contain a mysterious force waiting for faith to activate it. In Andrew's hands, they were an inadequate meal. In the disciples' calculations, they were almost irrelevant. In the hands of Jesus, they became a sign that gathered together the stories of Elisha, Moses, manna, Israel's shepherds, and the promised bread from heaven. The 5 loaves and 2 fish were never the source of the abundance. They were the sign placed in the hands of its source. That is what the crowd almost missed. They wanted more bread when the bread was pointing to Jesus. They wanted to make him king before they understood what kind of king he had come to be. John invites the reader to move beyond the crowd's conclusion, beyond the gift, beyond the numbers, and beyond the miracle itself. Because the power was never hidden in the size of what was offered, it was revealed in the identity of the one who received it.